Hello, viewers. Welcome to Literary Concepts. Today's topic is poetry. It is a very simple topic in literature. Let us try to understand the poetry. The definition of poetry. Poetry is a type of literature that conveys a thought, describes a scene, or tells a story in a concentrated lyrical arrangement of words. Poetry is a kind of literature which conveys, which expresses a thought. It also describes a scene, which tells a story in a focused manner by using the words in a lyrical manner, okay, in an artistic manner, using the words in a expressive manner. So that is the definition of poetry. This poetry has two kinds of subject matter. They are number one is objective poetry, the second one is subjective poetry. Let us try to understand the difference between objective and subjective poetry. The objective poetry, in the objective poetry, the matter is supplied by external objects such as deeds, events, and the things which we see around us. Here in objective poetry, okay, the matter, the theme is supplied, so influenced by the external factors, the outside objects, the outside events, the outside deeds, actions, the incidents which we see, which we experience around us. Whereas in subjective poetry, the matter is supplied by the poet's own thoughts and feelings. Here, poet's own thoughts, own feelings are expressed in subjective poetry. The second point in objective poetry is the poet acts as a detached observer. He acts as a detached observer and describes what he has seen, what he sees in and around him. Okay, so he just describes what he has seen or what he has heard. He will be a distant observer in objective poetry. But whereas in subjective poetry, he expresses his own reflections upon what he has seen or heard, what he has experienced, what he has heard, what he has seen, upon them, on those things, on those events, he expresses his own thoughts, his own feelings. The third point in objective poetry is impersonal. So, which is not related to person's feelings. Whereas the subjective poetry is a personal. So here the personal opinions and feelings are matter. The fourth point in objective poetry, the focus of attention is something that is outward, something that is external. So, for example, praiseworthy act, a thrilling occurrence, a beautiful sight. So something that is external factor means here there may be a praiseworthy action, some actions, some incidents, some thrilling events, some thrilling situations, or a beautiful scenario, a beautiful sight influences more. Okay, the attention and focus is given on all these external factors, external events, external situations in objective poetry. Whereas in subjective poetry, the focus and the attention is given to the poet himself. So, whatever the subject may be, whatever the theme, whatever the matter it may be, His mind is centered on his own thoughts and feelings. So, whatever his thoughts are there, whatever his feelings are there, so on that, on those thoughts, on those feelings, on those opinions, only the matter is focused. The matter is centered around on poet's own thoughts and own feelings. So that is these things. Okay, the poet's feelings and thoughts are given more attention in subjective poetry. The fifth point in objective poetry, the epic and drama are forms of objective poetry. The epic and drama represents the examples of objective poetry, in which the writer's personality remains in the background, so that the writer is behind. Okay, he is behind the scene. He is not involved. His feelings are not considered. So, whereas in subjective poetry, the lyric and elegy represent the subjective variety. The lyric and elegy type of poems represents subjective poetry. Now, let us uh, let us understand some examples of objective poetry and subjective poetry. Some famous poems of objective poetry and subjective poetry. Let us try to know the objective poetry examples. Ode to a Nightingale was written by John Keats, one of the most popular poem. Ode to a Nightingale by John Keats. The Red Wheelbarrow by William Carlos Williams, written by William Carlos Williams. The Emperor of Ice Cream by Wallace Stevens. The poem Emperor of Ice Cream by Wallace Stevens. The next poem Sea Fever by John Masefield. These are some of the examples of these poems are some of the examples of objective poetry, which represents objective poetry. Now come to the subjective poetry examples. I wandered lonely as a cloud by William Wordsworth. The poem I wandered lonely as a cloud, written by William Wordsworth. The next poem, The Raven, which was written by Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe. And the next poem, which is very popular in the uh, modernism, understand? So the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. In modern literature, this is very popular poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, written by T.S. Eliot. And the next poem, Daddy, which was written by Sylvia Plath, and the another poem titled Ode to the West Wind, written by P.B. Shelley, Percy Bysshe Shelley. So, and the last poem, When You Are Old, by W.B. Yeats. So, all these poems are examples of subjective poetry. I hope you understood the definition of poetry and the types of poetry, objective poetry and subjective poetry, the differences, and the examples of objective poetry and subjective poetry poems. So I hope you understand this. Thank you. Thank you very much.